My name is Justin McLeod, and I'm your host for a new podcast series called Back to the Basics. This show highlights the stories of resilient founders, investors, and operators in tech. These trailblazers paved their own path in the startup world in a non-traditional way.
If like entrepreneurship or being an entrepreneur is like a very loaded, scary thing, like just focus on becoming a creator, right? Like just create content, contribute to communities. You don't have to necessarily think about yourself like as even building a business. You can just think about building a brand or building an audience.
Resourcefulness is a skill set that every early stage entrepreneur needs to have when they're first starting off their business. In today's episode, I sit down with Sahil Lavingia, the author of The Minimalist Entrepreneur. Sahil joins us to break down how great founders do more with less. Sahil will share his story on how he applied his minimalist mindset to his venture-backed startup, Gumroad, an e-commerce platform that allows creators to sell digital products directly to their audience. So with that, let's dive in.
I started designing in Photoshop when I was like 13, 14 years old. And I don't know exactly what got me interested in that specifically. I remember like a friend of mine was into it. But yeah, I was just kind of attracted to this idea that, I could use software to make pretty pictures basically, and make money eventually too. Once I realized that and I was actually like thinking about this last night, that I think like the best way for anyone to make a living on the internet to start is to like learn design. Even though there's so much emphasis on learning how to code, I think actually learning how to design is like much more accessible. Anyway, I just like kind of did that and then found some online forums, started doing freelance work for other people, basically to buy Xbox games. And then the moment for me to like start building my own stuff, I'm not exactly sure like how it happened, but I think everyone has this moment where, you do work for other people and you realize over time that you have your own ideas and your ideas are better than their ideas. And why are you, why are you getting paid like an hourly rate to build somebody else's business when you could be building your own business? And that's kind of how I started to think about it. And so when I was, I guess, 15, 16 years old, I started, I learned how to code. And first off, I didn't know how to code. So I would basically hire other kids on the internet to like build, I'd design the app or the website, and then I'd hire somebody to build it. And that was just like, it cost money to do. Right. So it was initially just like, I don't want to spend money. So I'm going to learn to code so I don't have to spend money. And that's really kind of what got me into code. And then once I got into code, I realized all of a sudden that like I had all the sort of requisite skills needed to build a software business, charge money from strangers on the internet. And like once you do that, and I grew up in Singapore, so once I kind of had my first taste of that, it was kind of like, well, why would I go to why would I go to school? Why would I work at a job? I mean, I did those things eventually, but like it was pretty clear to me that like at some point in the future, like my goal was to basically work for myself and build software products, design software products, and kind of just, you can kind of do that from anywhere.
And that was
kind of the journey.
Yeah. And I was going to jump in there and say that, once you kind of started to teach yourself how to code and you kind of started to kind of, spend less money by, getting other people to do it, kind of doing it yourself. I read in the article that you built around like 20 apps, and then you paid or contracted out, what was it, $50 that you paid for an app or something like that? Something that's extremely cheap. So kind of walk us through the process of like, you as a teenager and you having all these awesome ideas, and how did you get out? So I think, what was that, 2010 or 2011 or something like that? How did you get out those products and distribute them to, actually get people to start using and purchasing them?
Yeah. So that was around probably 2008, 2009, something like that. And basically, I would, to kind of have my own ideas and connect with people. There's sort of a few places where I spent my time on the internet. One was, online forums, basically. And then another one was like, these kind of like tech blogs, TechCrunch, Mashable, Right Web, like all of those different blogs that, nowadays everyone just kind of like reads Twitter or like maybe
Yep.
goes to Product Hunt or Hacker News or something. But
Mhm.
that was kind of what people did back in the day. And basically every time I launched a product or built a product, so yeah, every like few weekends I would try to like build a new product. So I did probably
Mhm.
around 20 or so,
Mhm.
and basically I would build it, and then I would make a list of emails of Lifehacker, TechCrunch, Uncrate, like every blog, website aggregator, anyone that wrote about startup launches. I would just email them and say, hey, I'm a kid, I live in Singapore, like I built this app, it lets you do this.
Mhm.
Let me know if it would be useful to your audience. And then I would just do that. I would send it to like 30 people. I would
Mhm.
spend kind of like a few hours kind of just manually emailing everybody. And eventually like 2 or 3 people would end up writing about it. So
Mhm.
it was kind of, and then the sort of the longer strategy was I would get a bunch of traction. I would get, a few thousand users generally per thing. And then I would
Mhm.
sell the business. So I would go on a marketplace called SitePoint.
Okay.
Now it's called Flippa or something like that.
Gotcha.
And I'm sure there's other ones now. There's like Microacquire and
Microfire. Yeah.
right. But back in the day, yeah, basically I would just list it. I wouldn't make a ton of money. I'd probably sell it for like 5 grand or 10 grand or something like that. But as a kid, like that
Mhm.
was incredible. Like if I did that once a month or once every couple months, like that's enough to live, and be kind of financially independent. And
Mhm.
also like that money, it took me a lot longer to build this muscle, but what I should have done
Mhm.
back then was I should have spent, the next project I should have spent like a couple $1,000s. I was
Mhm.
still building everything for like very cheap. Um,
Mhm.
but I think in hindsight, it would have been probably even smarter if I was like, I'm going to reinvest 80%, 90% of what I make
Mhm.
back into the next 3 or 4 projects, because then I think I could
Mhm.
have probably increased the sort of the scale of what I was building earlier. It took me until I moved to
Mhm.
San Francisco and realized like, oh, this is how you actually grow a business, is you kind of like basically figure out how to get some money and capital and hire people and
Mhm.
scale, faster than just
Right.
like, trying to build these like, small internet businesses.
Right, right, yeah. So it kind of went from just like, an idea and just kind of cool products to like, okay, like once you kind of got into that, the Silicon Valley mix, you're like, okay, well, this is how you actually build a business model kind of around my product or my idea. So I guess to kind of fast forward from like, you building all these awesome apps, you spent some time at USC, but you was only there for like what, a few months.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of
Few months.
swooped up from Pinterest as one of their first kind of hires. So how did kind of Pinterest like find you? And then like, what was it like, working with, Pinterest at the early stages? I know that the founders were like non-technical. So, they didn't have like just the, typically, in the Silicon Valley, it's like, hey, you got to be a technical founder to build this. But like, what was it like, I guess, to kind of work with those, and like, how did they find you, Pinterest?
Yeah. So basically, I had started putting my own apps up on Hacker News. So every time I published an app, I would basically do a show HN post and say, hey, I
Mm,
built this, I built Gumroad, or I built Data, or I built ColorStream, or whatever. And most of the time it probably didn't resonate with people, but every once in a while it went to the top and stuck
mm,
there for like, a few hours. And it turns out if
mm,
you're trying to hire an iOS developer or a
mm,
designer, like you spend a lot of your time trying to find people in these places. And
mm,
so Ben, the CEO of Pinterest at, now, and technically wasn't at the time, but basically was,
mm,
just
mm,
sent me an email and saying, hey, uh, we're looking, we have this product, it seems to be, we've kind of reached some level of product market fit. We need an iPhone app. Your work looks really great.
mm,
Do you do freelance work? And so I started when I was at USC, just kind of doing, I think I billed them initially like $4,000.
oh
Um,
man.
and did like a prototype of the app, realized I probably needed more money. Or more time. So I charged them 8 grand. And then eventually I was like, I need to, like, this is a lot of work. I need to join full time in order to make this happen. And so I ended
Mm,
up just asking them like, hey, would you consider hiring me full time?
mm,
These other startups started reaching out, as well. And they were offering to kind of fly me up to
mm,
SF and all these sorts of things. And so I was like, yeah, can you match them? Or like, is this, and they were like, yeah, like, if you're willing to drop out of school and move to the Bay, like, obviously we'd love to have you more than 10 hours a week or whatever I was able to do at the time. But it's also, I think, goes to show like how hard it is as a non-technical founder that they had to go like find some kid. Like imagine like this is the heyday of iOS development. It's super competitive, and like they luckily, I don't know if they got lucky, but like they found somebody to that I was able to single-handedly build Pinterest for iPhone for them and design it. But like they had to go outside of the Bay Area. They had to go to someone who had no like, real professional working experience. And that's because like they weren't technical. And so my guess is like they couldn't convince anyone in the Bay Area to take them very seriously. Like they had a brutal couple years before I joined, trying to make their business work. And they went through a bunch of contractors, and like just it was not fun. And like it's also like even if it was hard back then to be non-technical, it's even harder today. It's probably 5 to 10 times. Yeah, 5 to 10 times.
Well, why? Okay, so not questions, but I guess we can jump into this. But like, I would think that being a non-technical founder today, would be, I guess, easier than it is, was back then. I know you said you kind of started to learn how to code back in 2008, 2000, around that area. But how would you say, I guess, with all these new, no-code tools and new software that's making it easier and more accessible for founders to kind of start, how do you compare that, the accessibility and the, I guess, lower cost of barrier to put a product in the market compared to like 2008? What are, I guess, the differences?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier to start, but it's harder to succeed. I think there's more and more tools and things that make it easier to like build a marketplace or an app or a website or a storefront. But that also means that it's easier for everybody. So every time, for everything that you ship, there's like 10 other people shipping the same thing. Whereas before, like, we could ship Pinterest for iPhone and there was like almost no competition because like not that many people were competent enough to be able to do that. And so we had this like much more, like when Facebook launched Open Graph, we were one of very few companies to be able to take advantage of it, which kind of like created this flywheel effect that made Pinterest what it is today. And so it's certainly, it's kind of like on an absolute basis, it's easier, but on a relative basis, it's kind of never been more difficult. I would also say that like what investors want right now is technical people who have, some experience and can have a track record. And there's enough people who do, because the industry is just 10 years more mature than it was back then, right? Back then, like the web was still pretty young, like AWS had just become a thing. There were, it wasn't like you could find a bunch of people with like, mobile app experience. It was like very new. But now there's like thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of people who do. So when you meet a founder who's like, I want to build mobile, I want to build a mobile app, but they have zero background in mobile app development, I'm very skeptical, right? Because it's like, well, what have you been up to the last few years? Like, there's YouTube tutorials out there. Like, you don't have to be amazing, but I do think you should have some. And again, it honestly goes back to the same thing that I learned when I was like 15, which is like, if you want to make your startup successful, like you have to minimize your burn rate. Like you have to save money wherever you can. And the by far the best way to save money on your startup is to learn every skill you possibly can. And what is the most expensive part of building any business, any software business today? It's engineers. Like by far, it's like 95% of it. So if you can have like amazing founding team of like 2 or 3 engineers, which are probably like, that's probably the median of like the people I invest in, that effectively means that they're saving at least $1 million a year, right? Like, which is like an insane amount of money, like, because you can hire the smartest, most amazing non-technical person, and the first thing they're going to have to do is go spend $250,000 a year on an engineer minimum, and like, how do they even hire that person if they're not technical? It's like very, very difficult. And it's actually probably the biggest mistake I see people make is they think they can raise a bunch of money and then they're going to have an easy time hiring people. And it's like, no, like raising $5 million is easy compared to hiring like a great, phenomenal engineer. Like it's
No, that's good. I would say that's a great, perspective, because I think that, I think that a lot of times, it is, founders have, that non-technical, route, and they try to like build it out. But to the investor standpoint, like you said, it's just more so about like, okay, what's the runway? After like, okay, how long can you guys last? Because the most expensive thing that's on the market and most competitive thing on the market is engineers. You have to actually hire them. So, I mean, you mentioned about, investors. So like, I kind of jumping back into your story, when you were at Pinterest, you kind of left at like, the height of it, and it was killing it. And you left and you started Gumroad, and, it wasn't too hard for you to, start raising capital, for your company within that first year. So I guess at the time, and we're going to definitely get in that, but at the time, like, what were your thought process behind building your own company and then immediately out the gate just kind of raising capital? Did you feel that you had to raise capital first, or did you feel like, hey, I need to still validate this concept first, then kind of thing? But what was your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, back then I was so confident in the idea that I knew it was high risk, but I also knew that if I was able to pull it off, it would be incredibly high reward. And yeah, the way that I kind of did the math was I think the first round I sold like 20% of the company for $1 million, and from like pretty great, like raised money from pretty good list of investors. And the question for me was like, is it worth selling 20% of the company to like have $1 million that I can do whatever I want with, hire people, get an office, move to San Francisco, not have to think about anything else? That was actually the biggest thing, probably, was just if I raised $1 million, like, again, I can design, I can code. So like $1 million is effectively 10 years of runway for me, like minimum. Yeah. It's really like impossible for me to fail, which it turned out to be. And so, yeah, it was kind of like 20% of the company to basically make the chances of me succeed is, 100%, instead of the average 20%, like no brainer. Right.
Right.
Should I have done it? I don't know. But like, I think the other thing that, I think people don't really talk about too much in the bootstrapping circles is like, and I love bootstrapping, and I think it's the best way everyone should start. But ultimately, like, it's such a noisy world out there that having a signal like I've raised money from this person can save you a lot of headache and time. Like if you go into a sales meeting with someone and say, hey, I'm a Y Combinator company, that just makes your life easier. Like it just does, because it's just like saying I have a Harvard degree or a USC degree or whatever, right? It's not saying that you're like a genius or something, or you deserve it more than anybody else, but like, it does mean that you put in some work and like was able to convince them that you're not like a lunatic, at least, right? And like that so it's kind of like a matter.
Yeah, so it's kind of like another tool to kind of add in your toolbox. It's like a form of like kind of credibility, another form of market validation. If this credible investor who has had billion-dollar exits wants to invest in us so early, then that means that, they kind of see us being that next billion-dollar company. And kind of just to kind of trend or go into that. So like, I guess 4 years after you launched Gumroad, you had to let go of some of your employees, because I guess some of the investors that you had on your cap table kind of were saying like, hey, you're not doubling, your growth fast enough. Like, could you talk about like, that part in your story when it comes to like getting investors, on board, but also kind of like the pressure from investors to kind of scale up real fast, and then kind of like, I guess not meeting their criteria. But could you talk about that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, like I think one thing that sometimes like the sort of Twitter narrative gets wrong is that like VCs destroy companies or like tell companies to do things like grow too fast. And like, the truth is like VCs don't care. Like they're too busy like chasing the next deal. Like they're not concerned about your company unless it's like their Uber or Slack or, like their mega win, they don't care. And so it wasn't really necessarily like VCs saying, hey, you're not growing fast enough, like change things, fire everybody. It was more like I couldn't raise more money from people because they would look at the numbers and they would say, okay, the numbers aren't there to raise, $15 million. So I wish they had almost leaned in more and said, hey, by the way, you're going to have a really hard time because you're not growing fast enough. But more, it was kind of like, you'll figure it out. Don't worry about it. Like, but it's the issue when like this is true more than ever in this market where founders ask me all the time, like, should I be concerned about certain investors? And I'm like, literally, the only thing you should be concerned about is the fact that you think that these VCs will even notice you. Like, we're so transactional right now. We're like every VC I know is like spending 80% of their time chasing like the next deal because things are moving so fast. And then the other 20% of the time, is like spent raising new money from LPs. Like no time is spent like annoying, like saying, hey, what's happening with the business? Like, no, like literally nobody I know is doing that right now. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, but that's kind of the state of the market.
Right.
So that's like a mistake that some founders make, is they think that like VCs will be helpful to them, which I'm sure does happen. Especially if you have like a team of people that work at a VC that can help. And I do try to help my portfolio companies every once in a while, but I think you're much more likely to be disappointed in how much helpful they are than like concerned that they're like too nosy. It's generally what I've found.
Gotcha.
And I was
going to jump into just the I guess what point within building Gumroad was that like mindset shift for you? As far as just like I know you wrote about your failure to build a billion-dollar company. Like what made you kind of like shift that perspective of what success is? Saying for you as a founder, and kind of from like billion-dollar company to like, hey, I can still be successful by having a profitable company.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the biggest one of the key moments for me was in 2015 after the layoffs. I realized that even though I, no longer had the kind of trajectory of building the billion-dollar company, I did have a ton of time. Like, I had more time to do basically whatever I wanted than anybody else I knew, because I was doing support on Gumroad. I didn't have that much energy to like use the time super well. But I did have a ton of time because I was, doing support for Gumroad, like a few hours a day, a couple hours a day. And then that was, maybe some other menial tasks. And then that's it, and we had spent during the layoffs and everything like that, like trying to automate as much stuff as possible so that when that did happen, like I could kind of just focus on doing the bare minimum, and the kind of ship kind of sailed itself. And so, when I realized that, I was like, okay, I have a ton of time. What do I want to do with that time? Well, the first thing I wanted to do was like learn how to write science fiction and fantasy. The second thing I wanted to learn how to do was back to my drawing roots and like art and stuff, like trying to learn how to draw traditionally with like pen and paper and stuff. And so that's kind of what I did. I spent like a good couple years at least really getting deep into it. And I left San Francisco, I moved to Utah, and I over time realized like, one, the business is eventually going to be successful. Like, it's just going to take a while. But then two, like I was enjoying my life, like doing all of these other things. And I realized like, that like $1 billion, $500 million, $100 million, $2 billion, like what's the number? Like, there's no number that's going to make me happy. Right. In the sense that like I hit this number and I'm like, cool, I did the thing, I'm done. Like, that doesn't really exist. Like $1 billion, when I tweeted it, is probably worth like $400 million today, like, given inflation and everything. Right. So like, also even just the numbers have changed so much. And so, I basically just realized like I can choose to be happy right now if I want. And all I have to do is stop caring about trying to build $1 billion company. And once I realized that like no one around me ever did care about that, like no one I knew wanted to even build $1 billion company in the first place, that's when I came up with that kind of the article. I was like reflecting on my failure to build $1 billion company kind of as a joke, because people were, I would tell people this story in person and people would be like very confused. Like, how did you, like, you failed to build it? Like, what? Like, first of all, you wanted to build $1 billion company, like, and then you failed to do it, even though like that's the default outcome. Like, how is that a failure? And also you're like making a few $million a year now, and you're considering that a failure. Like, that's weird. And so that's, I think, why that article did pretty well, was because a lot of people were like, could detect the kind of like the sarcasm almost in that, right? Where just like, this
and
is
let me ask you this
strange thing.
So where do you think the that mentality comes from? Do you think it's kind of like embedded into either Silicon Valley culture or venture capital culture, where they say like, hey, you have to be a $1 billion, company, or or else, but what do you think? I've seen that, I've heard just just through tweets and stuff. Not a lot of VCs, but some VCs say like, hey, if you're profitable, like we don't want to, kind of deal with you. But like, what do you think that mindset of founders, like that nonverbal cue is saying like, hey, like I need to build a $1 billion company, and if I don't, then I won't be successful. Like, where do you think that came from?
Yeah, I mean, I think mostly, I think one, it's definitely Silicon Valley uses that phrase more than anybody else, but I do think that it's deeper than Silicon Valley. Like, I think it's a very American idea that like wealth is the measure of success. And like, if you make a lot of money, like you can, that's kind of like the most important thing you could do as an American, So I think that it's, and then, I mean, you go to like a lot of places, it's like everyone wants to be a millionaire, you're right. Like that's, that's like also a thing that people aspire to, or like own a big house, or whatever car they may dream of, or something like that. Like I think it's like ingrained very, very early, that wealth is kind of like a measure of how smart you are, how successful you are, how much value you've created for the world, which I think is a little flawed. Like it's not exactly accurate. And so I think that's kind of like where a lot of that stems from, is, and I think on a personal level, it just comes from like a level of insecurity. Like you want to be able to show everybody that you can do a very, very hard thing. And, as a kid from Singapore, like, why did I raise money? I think partly I wanted to show people that I could. Like, look, I raised a Series A from Kleiner Perkins at 19 years old as a solo founder. I didn't, grow up in the US, like, and so like being able to do that, kind of was the point almost, in a way, right? Like even when I wrote the book, it's kind of Penguin and Random House published. A lot of people ask me like, why would you publish traditionally? Like, but the answer is like, because I can now tell everyone that I did. Like like I did a thing that very few people can do. And that, is true until I die, right? Like it's a credential that I now have indefinitely.
And I was gonna say, let's jump into the minimalist entrepreneur, man. I think that first of all, congratulations. I know how tough it is to like, get all your thoughts outside of, outside your head and put it onto, paper and organize it to a way that makes sense for other individuals. So kind of just to shift gears into your book, so what is a minimalist entrepreneur? Like if somebody on this call right now, like will be striving towards, of course, reading your book and striving towards that title of like, hey, like I'll consider myself a minimalist entrepreneur. What does that ideal minimalist entrepreneur look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think a simple way of thinking about it is, one, they're an entrepreneur, right? So there's someone who owns their own business, or wants to, aspires to, but also someone who doesn't let their business control them, and like doesn't let their business be like the majority of their identity. Like I would say that Gumroad is probably 33% max of my identity. It's like a diversification of my happiness in a way. I need multiple other things in my life to fulfill me. And, and that's okay. Like your business will not answer every single question in your life. And I think we just need to make it more, I think entrepreneurship's amazing. Like it's like the greatest force for like wealth acquisition for someone who grew up outside of the system or outside of America or wherever. But also I don't think the answer is like working 60 hours a week, forever. And like, that's also not like super sustainable and will lead to positive change for you, your community, your family, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like what we need to develop is a healthy attitude towards entrepreneurship, in which everyone can do it and should attempt to do it if they wish, but also like isn't just like, like the kind of tech bro narrative either, right? Like we want to make it as
Right.
accessible as possible to as many people as possible. And entrepreneurship can totally be something that you do 10 hours a week, or 5 hours a week, or 4 hours a week, as Tim Ferriss says, right? Or 20 hours a week, or 50 or 70. But something that's flexible, and just a part of your life versus like the defining characteristic of it. And that's kind of, I think, the theme of the book is, and I learned this like talking to all the people in the book, like these people are not defined by a single thing, right? Even though they may be known as like, oh yeah, like, the CEO of this company or the founder of that company, like they have hobbies, they have families, they like to travel and do other things. And that's awesome, and I think it should be more socially acceptable. Like when I go on Twitter, like I literally just tell people I don't work that much, and people love it. Like, why? Because like nobody wants to work that much, but like no one, it's like, I feel like it's like social, you can't say it, like it's like, Patrick from Stripe can't go on Twitter and say I work less than 40 hours a week. Like, right.
Yeah. And I was gonna jump in there. It's like, it's kind of like, it makes everything you're saying, it makes sense, what I'm saying? But I guess historically in the past, like if it's kind of this hustle grind, like you said, tech bro type of culture that's kind of been embedded specifically in startup founders building technology companies. It's like, you have to drink coffee, stay up, late nights, and build. But, with, I guess, over the past, few years, of course, mental health has been, one of the biggest things, that has been amplified. But I think that that's a great way to, kind of shift the mindset of people who are building these companies. So like, if you had to say, like, what would you say is like kind of the first step for someone like on this call who has a company or building a technology company? How can they transform their mindset, into like be more so minimalist entrepreneur, and that's not defined by what they're building, but just by more so like, becoming one of those minimalist entrepreneurs. What would you say kind of to transform that mindset?
Yeah. I mean, I think one way to think about it is to, if like entrepreneurship or being an entrepreneur is like a very loaded, scary thing, like just focus on becoming a creator, right? Like just create content, contribute to communities. Like you don't have to necessarily think about yourself like as even building a business. You can just think about building a brand or building an audience. And if you can't create, if creation, like writing blog posts is like too much of a barrier for you, then like you can just think about it like being a curator, right? Like start a review blog, start an Instagram account, like build, and that will help you build like relationships with a certain group of people that you care about, whether it's like pizza shops or ice cream shops or, SaaS products or like whatever it may be. Like, what do you, just like I did with TechCrunch and Hacker News, like just, pay attention to where you're already spending your time, who you're already spending your time helping. And over time, if you can do that, then you'll start to like have that intuition develop of like, oh, I could build a business here, right? But you only get there once you've like helped people, I think, enough times kind of manually to realize like, oh, I've helped like 5 people solve this exact same problem in the last month. There's probably a business here. And if I do build a business, then one, I can like charge for it for these people, but then also like there's probably a lot of other people out there that I can go find. And actually these people might know those people, right? So that's a lot of like kind of like the first chapter, I guess, of the book, like start with community, like really figuring out like how do you actually start adding value to the people around you. I think that's kind of like just like I did with web design when I was 13, 14 years old, like it's really the same playbook that everybody else follows that I know. And anyone famous on the internet today, it's like they literally just helped the people around them. And then one of the people they helped was like someone who could help them get to the next level, right? But you don't know who that is until you just help a lot of people. And like only they will make it apparent to you, right? Like for me, it might have been like Naval or Ben from Pinterest or whatever, right? But like that only happened because I was like putting myself out there. And if you don't put yourself out there, like it's very, very difficult,
Thank you for listening. In just a moment, we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back to the Basics podcast. Let's jump right back into it.
You jump straight back into the book aspect of things. One key word that you use a lot is profitability. You talked about sustainability and profitability. Why is a profitable startup, beneficial and important for a founder to have? Because I think that that hasn't been like the immediate case in the venture capital world as far as like building companies out. It's like, hey, don't worry about get revenue, but don't worry about profit. It's just like just get to the next round. Get to the next round of funding. But why is having a profitable startup beneficial for founders?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the reason I think it's so important, kind of like what I mentioned before, one, it allows you more time, right? You can just take more shots on goal. You can try more things out before you have to give up and, get a day job again or what have you, right? So that's pretty key. But I think in terms of negotiation with VCs, like it's a very scary, I mean, I've experienced this, so I know, like, it's very scary to walk into a meeting and be like, I need your money. Like, if you don't give it to me, I'm going to die. Like, that means they're not going to give it to you most of the time. Right. And if they do, you're going to get terrible terms, like it's not going to be a great conversation. You're going to spend a lot of time trying to raise money. It's like most of it is a waste. And so, I think even though, generally in the zeitgeist, like profitability is almost dissuaded. The truth is that's only really applies for like the top 0.01% of startups that are growing so fast that they can basically, say to VCs, like, look, we're growing like 3 times a year. Like, do you really want us to stop growing 3 times a year and focus on profitability? And the answer then is no. Like, if you're really growing that fast, like keep doing what you're doing because you're going to be able to raise enough money. And at some point, like there's so much clear demand for what you're building that you will be able to monetize. But I think if you're like growing 20, 30, 40, 50% a year, you're a great business and you're not profitable, you're going to just like go like this. And like, you're not going to reach that escape velocity. And so I just think a lot of VCs, they maybe think that they're more open to those kinds of startups, but like I see it every day that they're just not. Like the vast majority of startups that they invest in, like whenever you see like, oh, valuations are through the roof, like it's really a small sliver of startups that are able to really raise at those higher and higher valuations is what I've found. It's the startups that are able to raise money from like Andreessen Horowitz that get those valuations. But like, I still see plenty of startups that are like 5, 6, 7 million post valuations. Like it's still possible. You just have to go outside of the usual suspects, right?
Right. Oh yeah, that's work. So. No, that's good. Yeah, so I'm based here in Atlanta, Georgia, and we have, of course, Mailchimp. That didn't raise any, venture capital at all, and they, crazy outcome, crazy exit, and then we have Calendly here as well. So
I love Calendly.
Yeah, so Tope and good guy, and they definitely was profitable and kind of like you said, just kind of got a chance to kind of negotiate their terms and skipped over their Series A or seed round, Series A round, and went straight to like a Series B. So I think that to your point, just having that profitability is like you kind of have control of your own destiny. So that's
I'm awesome. Sure every VC was like freaking banging down his door for years trying to invest in that company, and he could say no. I don't need your money because I'm profitable. And when he ended up taking it, my guess is it was a very favorable deal because he could kind of set the terms and VCs wanted it badly enough.
Awesome. So another thing in the book you mentioned like was process. Okay. So I know you had a lot of disruptive, workplace policies in place. I know you just tweeted one out about, how you don't have to talk to a human being that get hired at Gumroad. So like, tell us about like having these processes in place. Cause I know you do, a lot of different things. Like you are a VC yourself, you're an investor, you're a founder, author. So how do you kind of like create that, or what's the importance, first of all, just like of automating these and creating these processes? You talk about like a minimal viable process. What is a minimal viable process?
Yeah. I mean, a manual valuable process in the book, basically I define as even like, again, a lot of the theme is like, what's the small version of like, what's the small step you can take today instead of building a business, like start being a creator, for example, right? And I think a process is like that to a product. So like instead of thinking about, I have to build a product, you can just like write a Google Doc or a Notion doc of like a series of steps that you can take to help people, right? Like a coaching call might be something like that. And again, just lowers the barrier of people trying stuff out. And manual valuable process is just kind of like the MVP of process. Like what's the the non-Y Combinator, even just like, small, simple like website with like a payment link and, a workflow that you do manually. And then over time, you can automate more and more and more of it until you have a product, right? Like eventually you do have a product, but you don't have to start there. So I think that's kind of like the point there. And then the reason, I think it's so important to me is just like, as you mentioned, like I have a lot of other things that I want to do. And I find that like when I do good work, it's kind of like, like I just disappear into like into, a hole for a while, and everyone has a different working style. So I'm not saying this is like the way everyone should work, but for me, like, for example, if I know I have a call in 3 hours or 2 hours, like I'm very unproductive because like, I know I can't stop being reminded, like, it's kind of like this thing hitting me in the head. Like you have a call in 2 hours, like it's hard for me to get work done like this, And so I just try to schedule my time in a way that like, I do have meetings and calls and every once in a while and stuff. I'm not, like a saint about it, but every, day or every other day or so, like I try to have a day that's like basically free, that I can just wake up, do my thing. And, I'll have some emails, I'll have some messages, et cetera, to reply to. But then basically for like, let's say 10 a.m. onward, like 10 a.m. to basically 4, like, 6 hours, I have a free calendar. And I think that's just really important to be able to explore new ideas, also react to things. Like the world is moving so freaking fast that I find that like, if I see something amazing, and, I see this even as a VC, like if I see something amazing and I don't respond within 24 hours, like it's gone. Like sometimes I have to move that quickly. And so, in that world, like I need that time, like I need hours a day free. And I also just think we did this like pre-COVID, but, we started hiring people all over the world. Like we have people now in 17 different countries, 44 people. And in that world, you just can't have meetings, frankly, because which time zone do you pick? I don't know. Like, and so that it was almost like a necessity. Like people are like, oh, you don't have meetings. That's cool. I'm like, well, we can't. I mean, like, otherwise someone's waking up at 3 a.m. Like it's just not possible for us. We've hired in all these different time zones, and if we don't have if we can't have meetings, then we have to work in this asynchronous way. And if we work in this asynchronous way, then like we can basically just commit to doing everything in writing, and nothing is over voice or over video. And like, it's actually like, once you commit to it, it's not that crazy. It's like, you're doing a similar kind of work. You're just doing it in a different medium, like instead of having a meeting and having someone take a bunch of notes, you have someone think about the meeting, have the meeting by themselves, take a bunch of notes, send those notes to somebody else. They kind of critique it or give feedback. And then you share it with the rest of the company or something, like, like it's not too different. And the cool thing is, like, I'm in like 30 meetings at a time in a sense, right? Because there are all these conversations that are kind of happening over time, and I can like go over here, think about this for a while, then go over here, answer this. And it's like people DM me on Twitter all the time, and, they're like, hey, can we jump on the phone and talk about this? And I'm always like, can you just ask me like what you want help with right here? And they're like, well, you have so much time to help me, but like, you don't have time to get on a call. That's weird. And I'm like, well, it's because like, I can help you when I'm on a plane. I can help you when I'm in the bathroom. Like I can, if I'm talking to you, like I can only talk to one person at one time, but if I'm typing, I can talk to, I'm, my day is just like, having conversations with people all the time.
I was going to say, I was going to add, just like, I think the pandemic kind of accelerated just that asynchronous work, just the remote work, and it kind of being more acceptable because all these tools and softwares were already available, pre-COVID, but now, saying everything is kind of accelerated and it's getting more acceptable, saying within just not just startup culture, but just work culture in general, so that's an awesome thing. Well, cool. So we're going to go ahead and jump into like just like Q&A to hear some of the people, hear some of the questions. All right. So Edwin Williams, so he was a part of one of our first cohorts at Square One. He asked, there's a big debate in today's startup ecosystem. Can you Brad, or talk this out a little more on why you think being non-technical is a disadvantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think of being non-technical as like being not being able to play a musical instrument. Like you can certainly be a successful musician or artist, or like Kanye, I don't think plays maybe he plays piano, I'm not sure, but like he's very successful, and there are many musicians, but certainly like if you can play the guitar or piano or both, your chance of success is like, I don't know what it is, but like probably a lot higher. Say if you want to start a restaurant, like your chance of being successful, if you know how to cook, is a lot higher, right? And so it's not to say that you need those skills, but certainly like it is a disadvantage. Like there's no way in hell I will never forego that. Like it is a disadvantage. Like I've never met a single person who, if you could go like this and learn to code, every single person would do that, right? Like I've never met a person who wouldn't. So like, therefore, it's not a disadvantage. Like everyone would sign up for it. I think you just have to be careful because some people don't want to, like they choose not to, which is very different, right? Like I always say, look, no one was born learning how to code. Like everyone, by the way, I don't think it's fun even. I don't even think, no, like it's not something that I'm just intuitively good at. Like I decided that, I wanted certain things in life, and the best way for me to get those things, like I could not have gone the job at Pinterest without learning how to code, right? I couldn't have dropped out of school without learning how to code. I probably couldn't have moved to the US without learning. Like it was a very strategic thing for me. Same thing with English. Like English is my third language. Why did I choose to learn English? I mean, I didn't really choose, but like every single person should learn English. Like that's far more important than learning how to code. But no one would say like I'm non-English. Like there's no term for that, because it's like an insane thing in this world to say that you're, so non-technical is kind of the same. Like no one says I'm like a non-musician or a non-cook or a non-designer, only non-technical. Why is that? And the reason is because it's hard to learn, and it's so valuable. Literally, you learn how to code, you can make $200,000 a year 2 years from now. Like you're choosing not to do that every day. You choose not to learn how to code, which is fine, but just know that that's the decision that you are making. And I don't know, I don't want to get too like,
oh no, I was gonna jump in there and say, so you raised capital as a solo founder, who could build and had this network and had the experience. So can you touch on, like, I guess finding that co-founder, like if you're not the technical person, but you have somebody that's like highly skilled in their perspective, like how would they go about, I guess kind of what about finding that co-founder that who is technical and kind of complements, them on building? Because I know that's I guess it's kind of a two-part question. How do you go about finding like that technical co-founder? And then two, like how do you feel about solo entrepreneurs who are just like building in the trenches like by themselves? I know you were.
Yeah, like I'm solo founder. Like I love solo founders. I think they're great. You have to be a lot more competent if you are a solo founder. So you have to be even more badass. But I try to only invest in badasses anyway. So it's, I would say like 20-30% of the companies I invest in are solo founder. Like I probably have a bias towards solo founders more than most VCs do actually. But you definitely have to be technical. Like if you're a solo founder, like there's basically no way to build what you want to build with like not being technical. Unless you are, I would say the one exception is if you are a multimillionaire, or a billionaire, then yes, maybe you could like get away with it. But most people are not there.
Aren't there yet. Okay. And then I guess to add to that, so Jen, she was a part of cohort 2 with Square One. She's asked, what are your thoughts on spending time versus spending money? So you spoke about teaching yourself to code to become a technical founder when you were young. That takes a lot of time. Which spend is the most minimalist approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, you want to spend your time, right? Like that's the asset that you have as a kid, or even as an adult. Like I would prefer to like work a dead end job, like at whatever, like the library, to have time and energy to like learn, hard skills that I think are going to be really valuable for me. So I think in the beginning, you want to spend your time in order to make money. And then over time, once you've done that and you have enough money, like I now have more money than time. And so I'm willing to spend money in order to make myself time again. but
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of like the first half of your career or so, like you probably want to be spending, or the first 10% of your, I actually think you can probably make the transition like in the first 5 to 10 years from spending
Mm-hmm.
time to spending money. But in the beginning, when you don't generally, at least I didn't have any money in the beginning. The only asset I did have was my time. And so, yeah, I would say like the sort of the simple framework is in the beginning, you want to spend time to make money, and then you want to spend money to make time, but you want to do each time you make that exchange, you want to have like a 10x multiple, right? So like in the beginning, I went from like, and I wouldn't say it's that much time to learn how to code. It's probably 100 hours, 200 hours. Like it's like less than Game of Thrones, like it's doable. If you watch Game of Thrones, you can learn how to code. Right. But it's like basically I went from like a $0 an hour hourly rate to $100 an hour hourly rate, which is like, I don't know what that is compared to the rest of the US, but it's like probably the top 10%. That was as a 15-year-old kid, like in a year or two. So like, that's less than college. College takes 4 years, so like you have, like, that's what I always benchmark to when people say, oh, it takes a long time. I'm like, you went to school for 4 years full time. Like that's enough long fucking time. And by the way, you spend money on that. You spend $200,000 a year. Like I did
a lot of money.
I used totally free content and I didn't spend a cent. Actually, I did. I spent $99 on the Apple Store license or whatever. But that was it. That was like the one cost of learning iOS development for me, and that made me, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right. So, no, yeah, I like what you said there about in the beginning you have to spend time to make money, and then you spend, once you get to the point, you spend, money to make time. So
the funny thing is like, some people are like, I don't want to learn how to code. It's going to take me too long. Like the opportunity is like too important or whatever. And then like 6 months later, they're like, I'm still looking for my technical co-founder. And I'm like, well, you could have learned to code in that time. Like you spent 6 months learning, like looking for a technical co-founder. If you just spent 2 months learning how to code, you'd already be there, you'd have, and like getting a tech, I hire engineers. Like I have 25 engineers that work at Gumroad. Why do they work at Gumroad? It's because I know how to code. So they know that I will respect them and I will be able to, so you don't have to learn, you don't have to actually be coding all day, but you have to have the skills to be able to choose not to. Right.
Yeah. Like the foundational fundamental things are like, okay, I can build this out and get something shipped out.
Yeah. And it just proves that you care. Like when I meet someone who's like, I hate coding, but I learned how to do it so I could build a prototype to show people. I'm like, awesome. Like you're my kind of person because I also don't like it, but I wanted to show people.
Right. Because it's more so not even about like, I mean, of course it's about having the skill, but it's also about the work ethic, I guess, behind even learning a new skill.
Yeah, it's all about work ethic. I mean, like Zuck is not the most amazing, brilliant engineer on the planet. Like
exactly.
Me and Zuck are probably roughly the same technical level in which we can build prototypes really fast. But we're mostly more focused on product and design and like strategy and stuff like that. But we still learned how to code so that we didn't have to like outsource it, and by the way, like those Winklevi twins outsourced it because they didn't know how to code. And guess what that happened? That was
exactly
$1 trillion mistake, for them. So that's what happens when when you don't learn how to code.
All right. So we got just 2 more questions and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up for today. So let's see. Abiola, she was a part of our 4th cohort at Square One. She said, what are your thoughts on crowdfunding? Well, she has 2 questions, but I'll just jump into this one. So what are your thoughts on crowdfunding? So I know you raised, what was it, $5 million on Republic, and that was awesome. We had Arlen Hamilton on here, and she kind of did the same thing with you also. But what are your thoughts on just like, I guess, the way the world or startup world is moving towards having crowdfunding more acceptable?
Yeah. Arlen's awesome. Definitely. She pioneered like a new way of funding a fund in this way, which is like pretty crazy. The bleeding edge. And so I did something similar, except for Gumroad, raised $5 million from 7,000 people. I think it's amazing. I mean, I think it's amazing for a couple of reasons. Like one is it allows people who may not have been able to raise money from traditional institutions to raise money, and quite a lot of money in theory. But then actually more important to me is that it allows people who haven't been able to invest in startups to be able to invest in startups, right? So like thousands and thousands of people now who can invest in startups who can't because they're not accredited, or they don't have the wealth, or not connected, or they don't live in the Bay Area, or whatever like the many reasons exist that you don't invest in startups. Like, I think crowdfunding is great. I think there is a conception that crowdfunding is easier than raising venture. It's like harder. Like even, you have to have a huge audience. That audience has to trust you a very high degree of, like Arlen's audience loves Arlen, and she's been super open and transparent. And so she can do this. I've done similar things, so I can do it. But like, there's so many founders who could raise like 100 million from VCs who couldn't crowdfund $1. Like, it would just not work for them because they don't have the audience. They don't have the trust. They haven't spent the time building those relationships. It takes time. Like, there's no real shortcut to this. And so I think that's like, when people ask me like, hey, I want to crowdfund money for my startup, I'm like, okay, how many commits do you already have? If you have none, then you should go get those commits. It's kind of like learning how to code in a way. It's like, just do the hard work of like, spend 10 hours emailing your customers, asking if people want to invest, make a deck. You can like, basically it's fundraising. Like it's not like you tweet out a link to Republic and like a gazillion people give you money, right? Like, that doesn't generally happen. Like, you have to do the work of fundraising. It's just, you're doing it with a different group of people, right? Instead of traditional VCs. And actually, traditional VCs are the easiest group of people to raise money from. Why? Because that's their job. Like, their job is to give people money. And so they're the ones who are most likely to do.
That's awesome. Cool. So, Sahil, man, thank you again for just taking the time out, sharing your thoughts, your story, your thoughts on, the philosophy behind your book, man. It was an amazing conversation. So everybody give a big round of applause for Sahil in the chat for just taking the time out. That was awesome. Yeah, I'll let you kind of just plug your book. I know I'm definitely going to buy some more copies for people who are within Square One community. Definitely be on the lookout. I'll be giving away some copies. But yeah, I'll let you kind of plug in like just yourself on this kind of the book if you would.
Yeah, I got a physical copy right here. It looks really pretty. I'm very excited about the cover. Modeled after like a protest sign, and it's like pink and yellow and all these colors that basically, I wanted a business book that didn't look like a business book. Awesome. They all look so boring to me and not my vibe. So yeah, that's the book. It kind of contains a lot of the thoughts. It has my email at the end of the book, but it's sahil@hey.com if you want to email me. And I put a lot of work into it. It's 2.5 years worth of work. It has these awesome like pink end papers that I think are pretty cool. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to typeset the book, and like just a ton. It was like a stupid amount of work, to be honest. But it feels good. It feels good to be done. So yeah, if this is your kind of your jam, like check it out.
Awesome. Well, cool. Well, thank you again for taking the time out. And then for us, like I said, anybody that's on the call, you can find out more information about us at squareoneschool.com. But thank you all. Have a good rest of the day, good weekend, and buy his book because it's awesome. Already got started on it. All right, y'all. So take care. Have a good one.
Yeah. Nice meeting everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Back to the Basics. Make sure you share this episode with somebody that's starting their entrepreneurial journey, and we'll see you in the next episode.